Hi, my name is Connor Lee Shaw. I'm a composer from Greeley, Colorado, and I currently reside in Los Angeles, California. I'm here today to talk about my collaboration with the Front Porch Ensemble. Um, and they are currently working on a piece that I wrote entitled Boom and Bust. Boom and Bust is inspired by a number of things that I have both perceived growing up in Colorado and that continue to be relevant to people living in Colorado with regard to our environment and our energy future. My inspirations for the piece first started with my memory of my high school graduation having a backdrop of an oil fracking well. Something as important in a young student's life as a graduation had this backdrop of fracking, which unfortunately in many cases have been shown to cause health issues in communities as well as not a sustainable resource. My other inspirations for this piece are historical. And in my program notes, I note that the oil and gas boom in Colorado and the economy it's generated is nothing new. There have been many different eras of generational or temporal economies in Colorado, including the first non-Native American settlers who were often silver and gold miners that were headed west in the gold rush. And then during the 20th century, radioactive materials were sought after in Colorado and also stored in Colorado during the Cold War. And there seems to be these recurring cycles of boom and bust economies, and hence the title of my piece. The piece overall is extremely programmatic, and the most programmatic element of this is in the piece I ask the ensemble at the end to, through their instruments and through sound, I ask them to create the sound of a lone jack pump, which is a device that extracts oil. I ask them to relay the sound of this jack pump as if it's the last lone jack pump left in the state, and nothing else exists there, which is essentially definitely a possible scenario in the future, considering the way the environment is going. This idea of environmental immediacy also had a strong connection to the concept of the piece. Throughout the piece, there is a theme that is in a bluegrass style that every time it recurs, like in a rondo, every time the theme recurs, it becomes more and more frantic and more chaotic things happen. And so this idea of cycles speeding up and events speeding up and becoming more disastrous is key and essential to the piece. However, I sought to contrast this with the potential for us to change our environmental and energy future. And so contrasted with the more frightening sections of the piece, including the end of the piece being somewhat apocalyptic, there are moments of hope that bleed through, and those moments are the potential for people in Colorado as well as throughout the world to revolutionize the kind of energy we are consuming, and also to ensure that what we are doing here on Earth is not boom and bust, and that everything we do on Earth can be sustained. Along those lines, I would say that in part some of the piece, because of its explicitly programmatic and somewhat political leanings, the piece is definitely an example fitting in with the rest of the Front Porch collaborative concert that they will be doing. The piece is intended in some way to be somewhat a piece of activism and also to grow people's awareness. The piece itself uses certain elements that are supposed to help the audience be more aware of what is going on. So, for instance, this idea that during my research for this piece, the idea I found that there were over 20,000 oil wells in Colorado in 2017, just in the county I lived in alone, factored heavily in this. And so I was doing things in the piece where I was taking the number of oil wells and I was turning those into musical notes based on the Fort system, taking notes 1 through 12 and then assigning those chromatic pitches. I was also doing things where the words oil and gas, the letters were themselves translated into notes. So the idea of oil and gas and the number of wells in Colorado in the county I lived in were both included in the piece. This was challenging too, to try to find something that an audience would want to be entertained by, but also have a piece of activism. And so those elements were very difficult to try to coalesce into one piece. But the important thing is that and what I felt was most important was that there were at least some sections of the piece that were hopeful. For me as a composer, I was extremely interested in this opportunity to create a piece based on environmental issues, since it weighs so heavily on me in my daily life, especially being in this generation of millennials that is extremely worried about our future. And so, in a way, the most rewarding thing for me about composing this piece was that I was able to express some of my issues and anguish in my own community and kind of externalize them in a way that was both entertaining but also a piece of activism that I had not necessarily done with music before. I actually continue to hope to do this kind of writing in the future that brings awareness to certain subjects in a tasteful and entertaining, but also meaningful way. And I really appreciate the opportunity from Front Porch Ensemble, and I hope you all enjoy my piece, Boom and Bust. Thank you.